Welcome to eMHWare training video number 6, the client menu. So today we're going to talk about all of the things that you can do within the client file, and we're going to start out of a client file that we've already accessed using our My Client list. And you can see that currently we are on the summary page, but we're going to look at the client menu. So we've already talked about in a previous video the user menu and how that's always going to display directly underneath of your organization's logo. Now, because we're in a client file, we can see that directly to the right of that user menu, we have the client's name with their ID number in brackets, and I can click on that to open up the client menu. So these are all of the various things that we can do within the client file. The first one in the list is the client data set. And this is the same page that we saw in the previous video when we were creating a new client, except it's populated with information because this client already exists. So we're going to go through each of these fields and talk about them. And this is where you're going to need to go if you need to update any of the client information. So at the end of the last video, I discussed how the summary page is read-only. So if you came into a client's file and you needed to make changes to their contact or address information, you would not be able to do that on the summary page. You do have to come into their data set. So we can see right up at the top here, we have the date that the data set was last updated. And this can be really useful just to show you how recent the information is. So if you're in a client file that hasn't been updated for a couple of years, that's just going to alert you that the information might not be the most accurate and it might need to be updated. I can see that this one was just updated today. So scrolling through, we have our main pieces of information. So the first name, last name, date of birth. We have that estimated checkbox that we talked about earlier. The age will populate based on the date of birth. We have some gender information, more naming information. This is where the address information is kept. So if you do need to update the client's address, you can come in here and do that right here. Contact information, so preferred language as well as any phone numbers, permissions and comments for each of those phone numbers as well. So we can see that this client's main phone number is listed here. We have permission to call, to text, and to leave a message. And there's also some comments here as well about the phone number. Scrolling down, we have email as well as permission to contact via that email. If the client has more than one email or has a different phone number that you want to add, we do have a drop down for other, so I would be able to select email and put in an additional email if I needed to. Scrolling down, if your agency collects any of this information, it can be populated here. So health card info, chart number, social insurance number, marital status, pregnancy status. We have highest level of education, military status and violence conviction. Those can be filled out. The nice thing about eMHWare is it's very customizable. So if there's any of these fields that your agency does not collect, we can hide any of these for you. Scrolling down, we have more culture and language information that can be filled out. Language interpreter required is listed here as well. And then we get down to risk factors. So risk factors are a really important feature of eMHWare, and they're just a way to notify or flag anybody who's looking at a client file that, hey, there's something important you need to know about this client. So the default risk factors are the ones listed here in bold. And harm to self or harm to others, these top two are considered severe risk factors in eMHWare. So if either one of those is set to yes, then the client will have a little triangle up here beside their name, and the triangle will be red, and it will say the client has severe risk factors. If harm to self or harm to others is set to no or unknown, and any of these other ones are set to yes, the client will still have the little triangle. It's just it will be yellow, and it will say this client has risk factors. Your agency can also add in their own custom risk factors. So we can see these two here for paper file and severe allergy. Those are just custom risk factors that we've created for this demo site. But your agency can add in whatever they might need to collect. And then you also have your risk factor details. So you can type in whatever more information you would need about these risk factors. And you'll also notice when we go back to the summary page here for a second that the risk factors not only display up here beside the client's name, but they display right on the summary page as well as the risk factor details. So I can view any of the details about that as well as any of the risk factors that have been set to yes. Back in the data set, after risk factors, we just have general comments that can be added about the client's data set. So you can add in whatever you need to in there. And then remembering to click on save anytime in order to save your work. Now you'll notice that I did make changes to this page and I did not click on save, and the browser is actually notifying me that my changes might not be saved if I leave the page. So depending on what browser you're using, the wording of that pop-up might look a little bit different, but they're basically all saying the same thing. If I choose to leave, then my data will not be saved. I can also click on cancel, and then I would be able to save my work, and once I navigate away, I won't get that pop-up. So it's just to notify you that, hey, you forgot to save, and asking you what you would like to do. The next thing in the client menu is the mental health section. So this is where you can go to record any primary or additional diagnosis that your client might have, as well as some important dates. So you will notice that the primary diagnosis dropdown is a single select, and once you've selected something in there, then you'll be able to pick any number of additional that you might need to. And this is a multiple select box, and it's going to tell me right at the top of the box that in order to select multiple, I have to hold Control on my keyboard. So if I hold Control down, then I can pick as many of these as I need to, or deselect as many as I need to. And anywhere that that's a possibility in imageware, it's going to tell you right at the top of the box. So the same thing goes for other illness information. I can hold Control to select as many as I need to. And then we have just 3 main dates that can be entered. So first agency contact, first hospitalization, and first diagnosis. And I can click on any of these date boxes to add in a date. Then just general comments about your client's mental health can be added into the comments box at the bottom. The next video will actually be specific for program history and referrals, so we're going to just skip over those ones for a second. And we're going to go right into client events. In client events, this is where you can record the current status of any of these events listed here. So whether that's education, school status, living arrangements, guardianship, any of these can be entered in here. You will see the current status as well as the date for that status. And in the count column, you'll see how many historical ones have been listed. So I can see that for guardianship, there's been 2 entries, and I can click on that to view the history of that. I can also come in here to add in a new one, just again by using the green circle with the plus sign and filling out the bolded fields in order to save. If you want to fill out every one of these all at once, we also have an all-in-one CDS events button. So you can click on this, and that's basically just going to open up all of these options, all of these events on one screen, and you can go through and fill those all out on one page. So that can be useful. You don't have to use all of the events listed here. We do realize that not everybody would collect all this information, but if you do find it useful to collect certain pieces, you can certainly just fill out the ones that are applicable to your agency. The next thing in the client menu is the medication section. So this is where you can go to view a history of any medications that your client is currently on or has been on in the past. You can click on these to view more details, or you can add in a new one again by using the new button. You do have to have a date as well as a medication. If you have any of the additional information such as the dosage, unit, instructions, anything like that, you can fill that out as well. And then just click on save to save your work. The next section is the allergies section, and this works pretty much the same way as medications. You're going to see a history of everything that's been listed in here, and then you can also add in a new one by using the new button. and type in any comments about the allergy, mark whether it's active or not, and then click on Save. And just as a reminder, on the client summary page, all active allergies and active medications will display here. The attachments section is the next thing in the client menu, and this is the main section where all of the attachments for this client will go. So anything that's been uploaded to the client file will go into this main attachments section. So you can use this gray search area up at the top to narrow down to look for a specific attachment. So if the client has a whole bunch of them and maybe you just want to see their incident reports or consents, you can select the different types, even pick criteria or program. And you can also come in here to add in a new one by clicking on the new button. This works about the same as attaching anything to an email. So you're going to click on choose file and it'll open up the files on your computer. So you'll find where the document has been scanned in or where it's kept on your computer. You'll choose that file. You can pick a type. So this can be customized, just a list to narrow down the type of attachment, as well as any other information you have about it. You can enter in all of that and then click on save to upload your attachment. There are a couple of different places in the system that you can upload attachments to. So we will talk about that when we talk about contacts and case notes and case data forms. But the main place that all the attachments will go is just in the client menu in the attachments section. So that's where you can go to view all of the attachments for a client. The next thing is the client address book. So if you remember back in video number 3, we talk about the agency address book, and this address book is a little bit different. So this one is specific to the client. And you'll come in here, if you come in here, you'll notice there's 2 different types of supports that we can add for a client. So we can see a list of all the supports that have been added, and we can add in a new one. So we'll talk about the difference between a personal support and a community support. So if I want to add in a new personal support for this client, I'm going to open that up, and this would be somebody who only relates to this client. So whether that's a family member or a neighbor or a friend, I would want to enter them in as a personal support. So I do have to have a name for the person as well as pick the relation from the drop-down. I can mark whether I have permission to disclose to this person, whether they're active in the client's life currently, if I want their information to display on the summary page. I can also mark if they're the next of kin, primary emergency contact, if they're allowed access or authorized pickup of my client. And I can put in a start and end date, as well as entering in their contact information. There is a little shortcut here. If the person you're entering lives with the client or has the same phone number, I can use client phone numbers to populate that into here, as well as I can use client address if I need to populate if the person lives with the client. So alternatively, I can come in here to add in a new community support. And what this is going to do is we're basically now going to be linking this client with somebody in the agency address book. So the agency address book, again, is just a listing of any agency or person in the community that your agency would work with. So whether that's CAS agents or dentists or doctors, things like that. And within the client address book, we can link those to the client. So what we're going to do is first, we're going to pick a category. And this is the same drop-down that we see in the agency address book. So who are we assigning to this client? We're going to assign a family physician. The second drop-down is going to be anybody that's entered into there as a family physician. So you'll notice it automatically populates the doctor's phone and address information into here. And I can also check off permission to disclose for this person, active, or display on summary page. So I have the same permissions there. The nice thing is about the agency address book and the client address book is that if this doctor calls and says that they need to update their phone or address information, you don't have to go into all 20 clients that might be associated with this doctor. I can just go into the one place, into the agency address book, and update their information, and it's going to automatically update it in all client files that are associated with them. So that can be really useful, and it's also one of the reasons it's so important that that agency address book information is kept up to date and as accurate as possible. So that's the difference between a community support versus a personal support in the client address book. And you'll see on this page, we can also see at a quick glance who is the next of kin, emergency contact, if they have access or pickup, whether we have permission to disclose. And we can also see anybody that we've checked off as display on summary page will also display when we come into the client's summary page. So we have contact information from the agency address book over here. So whether that's personal contacts, such as the mother, or community supports, such as the CAS worker is listed here as well. The next thing in the client menu is client connections. So this is where you can go to record any connection or relationship that this client might have with another client at your agency. So whether that is a family group or enemies, also restraining orders. A lot of agencies use client connections to record a restraining order between two of their clients, but it can be used for multiple reasons. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add in a new one because this client doesn't have anyone. We do have to give it a name. So I'm going to just create a family unit. So I'm going to say test family, and I'm going to add in a client. I'm going to say that this client here is the brother of my client. So then once I've selected my client, I do have to pick their relationship or position in group. So I'm going to go ahead and say that my client is the sister, this client is the brother, and I can add in as many clients as I need to. And then I'm just going to click on save. The nice thing about client connections is if it's checked off as a family unit, then this is also going to display on the client's summary page. So under family on the summary page, I now have that client listed as well as what relationship they have with this client. And I can click on this to bring me right to that client's file. So it can be really useful to record different client connections that you have at your agency. The last thing in the client menu is the lockbox. So I'm going to talk about that quickly. So depending on permissions, you may or may not see lockbox in the client menu, but it is important just to know that it exists and what it does. So it's just basically an added security feature for your clients. So if, for example, you have a client that comes in and says, my neighbor works here at the agency and I don't want them to be able to see my file, we can only deny workers in the deny list. So we would pick that option, and then we can add in the client's neighbor or whatever worker they do not want to see their file. What that's going to do is mean that that worker will not be able to find the client anywhere in the system. So it doesn't matter how they search for them, they would not see that they're a client in the system or that they've had any interactions with your agency at all. Alternatively, you could have a client that comes in and says, I only trust this worker. I don't want anyone else to see my file. You can change this to deny all workers and only allow approved workers. So that can be a list of your agency's privacy officer or whatever workers should have access to this file, and then no other workers in the system would be able to find the client file. So this will probably just be your agency administrators that maintain this list, but it is important to know that it exists just in the event that another worker comes to you and says that they can't find a client in the system. It's just important to note that this does exist because there might be a reason that they can't find them. So just keep that in mind when you are working in the system.